Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Fantasy Football Insider. Back at our regular time,
Yes.
12:30 after a week at 11:30 or 11, whatever, doesn't matter.
What time it
Dan
was,
Labbe,
who knows?
Chris Fedor. If you have fantasy football questions, scroll on down into the comments and ask what you need to ask, get some lineup advice, injury advice, whatever it is. And Chris, you have apparently been inundated with questions about a particular Cleveland Browns quarterback.
Yeah, a lot of people are asking, okay, is Brian Hoyer a viable fantasy quarterback now? Hey, the Browns are 3-2. They're coming off the win against the Steelers. And I keep telling people, no, this is fantasy football. It's about big-time points. It's about teams that throw the ball a lot when it comes to quarterbacks. And it's a position, Dan, that is just so deep. It really is. You can find about 14, 15 guys that I'd rather have at this point than Brian Hoyer, because the truth of the matter is the Browns are a team that wants to run the ball, and then hit some big-time shot passes off of that. Brian Hoyer's played 5 games so far this year, Dan. He's got 1 touchdown in 4 of the games, and then he had a game where he had 3 touchdowns. So when you're talking about fantasy, from that perspective alone, Brian Hoyer is still not a viable option unless the matchup is really, really good and you feel like the Browns are going to have to throw the ball a ton in that particular matchup.
That's not the case this week.
No, it's Jacksonville. You're going to run the ball over and over and over with Jacksonville. And hey, maybe the Browns get off to a big lead. Maybe it's Brian Hoyer getting 1, 2 touchdowns. But you like the fantasy quarterbacks that are going to throw the ball 35 to 40 times. They're going to get you 250 to 300 yards. They don't have a reliable running game when they get inside the 20, so the team has to throw the ball. And that's just not Brian Hoyer. The other thing, Dan, he doesn't have the big-time weapons in the passing game.
Yep.
You want the guys that have a bunch of weapons all over the place, 2, 3 wide receivers that you can start, maybe a tight end that you can start. It's fantasy football. In real life, Brian Hoyer has been a very good quarterback. Very good. He's part of the reason why the Browns are 3-2. In fantasy football, he just doesn't put up the gaudy stats.
One guy, though, that I know fantasy owners are breathing a sigh of relief about is Jordan Cameron. Finally did a little something on Sunday. Got into the end zone, had a big reception. Jordan Cameron owners are feeling a little bit better about him right now.
A little bit, you're right, but I think the little bit is the key here, because he only had 3 catches.
Yeah.
He only had 3 catches, so he's not getting the catches, he's not getting the targets, but what you like to see is how the Browns are starting to use him. He has turned into the big play pass catcher for the Browns, and he's going to, I think, get more and more involved in the red zone. He has to, because he's a mismatch out there. He's got the athleticism, he's got the size, he usually catches the ball effectively. So I think fantasy owners are starting to feel better about him, Dan, but unfortunately, he hasn't had that season that a lot of people expected him to have coming into this year. He's been passed by a guy like Greg Olsen. He's been passed by Travis Kelce in Kansas City, even though Kelce is not on the field more than 60% of the time. It's just the way that the offense is running for the Browns and the way that Brian Hoyer spreads the ball around. That's the other thing. One week it's going to be Andrew Hawkins. Another week it's going to be Miles Austin. Another week it's going to be Taylor Gabriel. Then another week probably Jordan Cameron. I think when the Browns get in more tightly contested games, though, that's when you're going to see Jordan Cameron play a little bit better, because they'll have no choice but to go to him.
All right, now the Browns this week are facing a rookie quarterback in Blake Bortles. The guy's put up big numbers, has thrown a lot of interceptions. Not really a guy you want starting on your fantasy team. But just looking at rookies in general, especially at the quarterback position. Of course, your guy Teddy. I know you're going to throw him out there.
Yeah.
But what rookies have had the biggest impact this week or this season?
Well, none really, unfortunately, at quarterback, because it's been a mixed bag, really. You talk about Blake Bortles. Yes, Dan, he did throw for more than 300 yards, but it was only 1 touchdown. And touchdowns, those are the things that you want from quarterbacks usually. I think Derek Carr is a guy moving forward, Dan, that could have a little bit of value as that guy that you have on your bench, maybe a bye-week fill-in. He had over 300 yards passing against the San Diego Chargers, one of the best defenses in the NFL so far this year. and he had 4 touchdowns against that same defense. It looks like he's got a new weapon in the passing game, a guy who is emerging, Andre Holmes. Of course, Oakland still has James Jones. They went out in free agency. They brought him there to be one of the go-to targets. And they're a team that has struggled running the ball all season long. Maurice Jones-Drew got injured at the beginning of the year. Everybody knows Darren McFadden's been a big disappointment since coming into the NFL. So Derek Carr, to me, is somebody that you can have on your roster, and he can be a bye-week fill-in. The other thing that you love about him, Dan, from a fantasy perspective, is Oakland stinks.
Yeah.
They're going to be behind in a lot of games. They're going to have to play catch-up in a lot of games. That means a lot of passing attempts. That means a lot of garbage time touchdowns, garbage time yardage. Those are things that you like in fantasy football.
You know who else is breathing a sigh of relief? That guy, not me, usually it's me, who sees Tom Brady's available, goes out and gets him and says, I got my quarterback. After a rough start, Tom Brady's getting it together a little bit.
You're right. 6 passing touchdowns in the last 2 games, including 4 against Buffalo. Now, Buffalo is one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. So I think you have to temper your expectations still when it comes to Tom Brady, because he doesn't have the big-time weapons that he has had in the past. There is no Wes Welker. There's no Randy Moss. He's throwing to a dude like Brian Timms. Brian Timms, who comes off the suspension list. He has 1 catch, 43 yards, and a touchdown. Brandon LaFell, a guy who had 2 touchdowns, but he's inconsistent. His production's going to be inconsistent. And tonight, hey, Brady might struggle tonight, Thursday Night Football. Bad weather expected in Foxborough, and the New York Jets have a really strong front 7 that can put a lot of pressure on Tom Brady.
All right, let's talk injuries. Who are some guys that you're worried about going into this week?
Dan, there are too many injuries in fantasy football.
We're that far along in the NFL season now.
I mean, think about what has happened on a weekly basis when it comes to fantasy football. Right when you think you're going to get A.J. Green back, one of the top wide receivers in the game, he has this toe injury, and it flares back up again. And you're thinking, oh my goodness, okay, maybe we'll go out, we'll get Marvin Jones. Marvin Jones is somebody that had a big season last year for Cincinnati. There are big expectations for him this year for the Bengals. Now he's placed on IR, so he's done for the year. It's a different kind of injury every single week. Noshan Marino, he finally comes back after injuring his elbow, and owners that hung on to Noshan, they're thinking, okay, great. He's going to take that starting job back from Lamar Miller. What happens? Torn ACL. He's out for the season. Fantasy owners are thinking maybe Ryan Matthews is going to return for the San Diego Chargers. Now they say maybe not another 2 weeks, maybe not even 3 weeks. He hasn't even started to do activity on his injured knee at this point. So it really is just trying to survive with all of these injuries in fantasy football at this point. How about another one? Stephen Ridley of the New England Patriots. Yep. He's done for the year. Torn ACL. That means New England, maybe more opportunities for a guy like Shane Vereen. A lot of people had high expectations for Shane Vereen, but he's not your typical runner. He's that Swiss Army knife. He can run a little bit, but he catches more, and his value is those catches out of the backfield and the big plays. So maybe now in New England, Brandon Bolden is a guy who's going to have increased value. But then again, Dan, it's the Patriots. It's Bill Belichick, and he plays a lot of games when it comes to running backs. So you lose a guy like Stephen Ridley, who is carving out a nice role for the Patriots. It's somebody different every week, and it's getting very, very frustrating. So go to that waiver wire, be active on that waiver wire, and keep your team afloat.
Yeah, when it comes to the Patriots, you never know what's going to happen in that running game.
No,
Belichick could line anybody up back there.
Somebody said the other day, hey, Chris, what do you think about Brandon Bolden? And I said, I don't know. Could be Brandon Bolden tonight against the Jets because they want that big physical presence, or it could be Shane Vereen. You just don't know when you're talking about guys like that. And here's the other thing. When you're starting to rely on Brandon Bolden, a guy who had 6 carries for 10 yards last week against Buffalo, might be in some trouble there at running back.
Yeah, things probably aren't going as you planned at the beginning of your fantasy season. So who's out there? Who are guys that, if you're dealing with these injuries, who do you go find?
Well, again, I think you have to start targeting some guys that could have stash value and hoping for the best. A guy like Jeremy Hill from the Cincinnati Bengals, Gio Bernard, he left the game momentarily last week against Carolina with a shoulder injury, but Hill has kind of been involved a little bit here and there, Dan, and he had that touchdown, and he's a hammer. He's a big physical guy, so maybe you go out, get Jeremy Hill, and even if Gio Bernard is going to get the majority of the carries, he'll get 6 to 10, and one of those is a goal line touch. Isaiah Crowell, that's a great option. He's probably not out there in a lot of leagues, especially if you're in a 12-team league or a 14-team league, because he's got those touchdowns. He's going to stay involved in this running game. It's probably going to be 7 to 10 carries, but he is effective near the goal line. He's a hammer near the goal line. He brings a different kind of dimension, a home run hitter to the Browns offense, not like Ben Tate. So he's somebody that you can go out and try and grab. Jonathan Stewart, he's going to get the start for Carolina in the backfield. Maybe people dropped him because he's always injured, and he was injured recently. He's somebody that may be out there. Darren McFadden of the Oakland Raiders, if you're looking for a running back, he could be out there. Jerick McKinnon from the Minnesota Vikings, he might be available. But really, when you talk about running backs, those are always the first to get swooped up off the waiver wire. So it's slim pickings there. At wide receiver, though, Dan, there are more options. Let's say you had Victor Cruz. Okay, you had A.J. Green, and you're looking for somebody. Andre Holmes is a guy that I've already mentioned. He's become the go-to target for Derek Carr in Oakland. He's coming off a 4-catch, over 100-yard game, 2 touchdowns. He's big. He's fast. He knows how to get open. He's been targeted 20 times in the last 2 games or something along those lines. He's somebody to take a look at. Malcolm Floyd from the San Diego Chargers, another guy that you want to look at. Him and Phillip Rivers have had a rapport for a long time. And every time Malcolm Floyd has stayed healthy, and that's a big problem with him, but when he has stayed healthy, he's getting about 5 targets per game. Phillip Rivers looks for him in the red zone. And this week he plays against the Kansas City Chiefs. And Marcus Cooper, the defensive back for Kansas City, has been ranked the 2nd worst cornerback in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus, in the first 5 games. Malcolm Floyd probably going to be going up against him a lot. And Cooper himself has allowed 5 touchdown catches already this year in 5 games. So he's somebody that you want to take a look at. Devontae Adams, his role, the rookie from Fresno State, in Green Bay, his role continues to evolve more and more and more. And we know one thing about Aaron Rodgers' weapons, Dan. They're going to be active when it comes to fantasy football. Even though Jordy's there and Randall Cobb is there, Devontae Adams, a wide receiver 3 in Green Bay, sometimes is more valuable than a number 2 wide receiver other places.
And Aaron Rodgers isn't afraid to throw the football to anyone.
No, you're right about that.
Everyone is an option. Okay, so let's say, I'm sitting there and I see, let's say somebody wants to move an injured player, okay, because they're just tired of dealing with that guy. Is there a player that another owner should target? Is A.J. Green a guy that maybe you could target and snipe off somebody's roster?
Absolutely, and I don't think he's the only one. And the thing that you know about A.J. Green, number one, he is expected back in a couple of weeks, so he's somebody that you can try and snipe off a roster. And the other thing that you know is that when he plays, he's a week winner. He gets you 15 to 20 points. He is the go-to target for Andy Dalton. And as soon as Green comes back, all of a sudden Dalton starts looking for A.J. more and more and more. Likely, because of A.J. Green, the owner that has him is probably struggling a little bit. Maybe he's off to a slow start. Offer him somebody that could help him more now, maybe a 2-for-1 type deal, 2 players that could help him now, and you're off to a good start. Go get A.J. Green. The other guy that I would recommend, he's always injured. Everybody understands that about him, but he was running well before he got hurt. Ryan Matthews of the San Diego Chargers. It doesn't mean that Brandon Oliver is going to completely disappear when Matthews comes back, but Matthews is the workhorse. And I think Oliver would slide into that Danny Woodhead type role. He catches the ball out of the backfield, maybe some 3rd downs, maybe some 2nd downs. But Ryan Matthews is going to have big-time value, I think, when he comes off that knee injury. When's it going to be? I don't know, 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks, but you're talking about somebody who could really help you in the playoffs. Ryan Matthews is somebody that you want to target.
All right, let's do starts and sits before we wrap things up. Give me your sits.
A couple of sits for me, Dan. When you're talking about running back in particular, Zach Stacy, you want to stay away from him. He's playing against the Seattle Seahawks. Very good run defense. What DeMarco Murray did, teams just don't do against Seattle. And Zach Stacy's coming off a rough game against the San Francisco 49ers, and he's kind of in a crowded backfield. Trey Mason got involved. on Monday night for St. Louis. And Benny Cunningham is still around in St. Louis. So he's somebody that you want to stay away from. I always stay away from running backs playing against the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals have a top 5 run defense despite a number of different injuries on the defensive line and in the linebacking core. That means Darren McFadden is somebody that you certainly want to stay away from. And I'd also stay away from Steven Jackson playing against the Baltimore Ravens when you're just talking about running backs, because Baltimore is a very strong run defense. Steven Jackson's in that committee backfield with Atlanta, and I think as Atlanta continues to try and look for more and more weapons offensively to reignite that offense, I think Anton Smith is somebody who's going to get more touches, more opportunities for Atlanta, because they're in must-win situation at 2-4, and it's a crowded backfield there. You're talking about Jacquizz Rodgers, you're talking about Smith, you're talking about Steven Jackson. So in his limited carries, if the matchup is right, he can probably be effective and get 75 and maybe a touchdown. But against the Baltimore Ravens, I think that would be very difficult. When you're talking about wide receivers, guys that you want to stay away from, I think Roddy White is somebody that maybe you want to stay away from. I don't know if Jimmy Smith, the outstanding cornerback from Baltimore, is going to be matched up on Julio Jones or Roddy White, but Roddy is somebody who is dropping a lot of passes. He got hit hard a few different times by the Chicago Bears. I thought he was going to go to the sidelines because of a concussion. He's been really, really bad in terms of converting his targets to catches this year. He's somebody that you want to avoid. I'd also avoid Eric Decker tonight, Thursday Night Football against New England. He is not 100%. He's still dealing with that hamstring injury. Got in the end zone last week, so you like to see that. You know Geno Smith is going to target him, but he's probably going to be on Revis Island tonight against the New England Patriots.
Who are the guys you got to start?
I think a guy that you absolutely have to start when you're talking about wide receivers is Andre Holmes. I mentioned that. I would also start Malcolm Floyd if you're looking for somebody who's going up against a team that has a really weak secondary. I already mentioned how bad Marcus Cooper has been. You want to put him in your lineup. Jordy Nelson is a no-brainer. There's no doubt about that, but Randall Cobb is also somebody. Carolina's defense was supposed to be one of the best in the NFL this year. It hasn't been that, especially their secondary. Antoine Cason, I mentioned how Cooper is one of the worst cornerbacks in terms of Pro Football Focus rankings. Antoine Cason, top 5, bad. So you want to attack that matchup with every single Packer that you can. Devontae Adams, Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb as well. I think Emmanuel Sanders bounces back. Denver is a team that has relied on Demaryius Thomas recently and Julius Thomas, but Emmanuel Sanders, even though it's a tough matchup playing against San Francisco, I think you can make some moves against San Francisco in that secondary, especially a guy like Jimmy Ward, who got banged up last week, and he is a rookie, so you want to go with him. Now, I think Mike Wallace for the Miami Dolphins, a guy who has become the go-to target for Ryan Tannehill, playing against the Chicago Bears, normally a generous defense. It's a rookie cornerback, Kyle Fuller. He's been terrific in the first couple of games so far for Chicago, but I think Mike Wallace, a veteran, could get the best of a guy like Kyle Fuller.
All right, that'll do it. Fantasy questions, of course, tweet them at Chris Fedor, and we will do a podcast on Sunday morning. It'll go up around noon with some last-minute fantasy football advice. We'll be back with you again next week at 12:30 on Fantasy Football Insider. Thanks for watching.